All right, welcome back, everyone. Next, we are going to receive an update from NSB's NDA 2.0 working group on how we could address the STEM talent crisis with a 21st Century National Defense Education Act. Then we'll hear from and engage with panelists from various sectors on needs and opportunities for an NDA 2.0 as the board works on refining ideas and build a multi-sectoral coalition. As I noted previously, we have seen growing bipartisan interest from Congress, and I think that the next administration could embrace bold action on the American workforce. The scale of the current talent crisis is so large that half measures and band-aids are not going to meet the moment. I'll also add that just a few days ago, CoSTEM released their federal strategic plan for advancing STEM education and cultivating STEM talent, with Punch as co-chair, along with Kei Koizumi from OSTP. And one of the three cost-cutting principles resonates very much with the approach NSB is taking regarding NDA 2.0. The report states, quote, the federal government alone cannot produce the STEM talent needed for the entire country. Multi-agency and multi-sector partnerships and ecosystem development, including with international counterparts, are necessary to achieve a vision for STEM in America, end quote. Clearly, this approach is resonating, and our panel is here to build on this premise. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to NSB members Kay Van Stassen and Julia Phillips to introduce the session, our guests, and to moderate the discussion.
Thank you, Dario. Welcome, everyone, to this session on developing a National Defense Education Act for the 21st century. As the National Science Board has long observed, STEM talent is the foundation for our entire science and engineering ecosystem, and in turn, for U.S. national security and economic prosperity. Despite the importance of our STEM talent, we currently face a domestic shortage. This crisis includes 600,000 unfilled cybersecurity job openings, shortages for workers from welders and electricians to quantum computing to semiconductors manufacturing and many others. Only half of all base industries for defense report having enough workers for current production rate demands. In addition, we rely on foreign talent at advanced degree levels, especially in fields like engineering and computer science, which underpin critical technologies. We are grateful for this talent. The vast majority of these international students stay in the United States following their studies and contribute enormously to this country. At the same time, our dependence on foreign talent renders the US vulnerable should they choose to go elsewhere or if their ability to study and remain in the United States changes rapidly. To this end, we need to incentivize more domestic STEM talent, even as we continue to welcome foreign talent. Exacerbating this crisis is the state of domestic primary and secondary STEM education. We have a long-standing recruitment and retention problem for pre-K-12 STEM teachers that is in the hundreds of thousands, and student test scores, which have consistently been behind that of many of our global competitors, fell in the wake of the pandemic. This is why the National Science Board is calling for a new National Defense Education Act, loosely inspired by the 1958 NDEA that powered American success in the space race. NSB sees an opportunity for a new NDEA to make a generational investment in STEM education across all levels and in STEM workforce development, including in the skilled technical workforce. NDEA 2.0, as we're calling it, is envisioned as a multi-sectoral, nationwide effort that will get high leverage on federal dollars to meet short-term workforce needs and build the STEM talent engine of the future. We are eager to make NDA 2.0 genuinely bipartisan and multi-sectoral, industry, state, national security, philanthropy in its development and funding model. NSB has identified 3 important areas for action that are also politically salient. First, investing in local STEM education and workforce ecosystems, amplifying what is already working well at the local level, respecting that states and communities understand their needs around education and training, as well as how to forge multi-sector partnerships for their regions. Second, investing directly in STEM students and workers in critical areas. And third, addressing the STEM teacher shortage. The full pitch can be found in tab 4.1 in Diligent, along with the bios of our esteemed panelists who will be sharing perspectives from their different sectors on what their sectors would like to see in such a bill. Such a bill referring to the NDA legislation that we're hoping to pull together. And what those sectors can bring to the table for an NDA 2.0. Before we start, I would like to ask board members to please turn off your cameras and mute your microphones until the Q&A period. And I'm going to invite our panelists all to turn on their cameras. It looks like they have. Thank you. So briefly introducing our panelists. Representing the philanthropic sector today is Maria Klawe, who recently transitioned from a 17-year term as Harvey Mudd College's president to the president of Math for America. Relevant to today's conversation, Maria is a board member of Museum of Mathematics and the Institute for Computational and Experimental Research in Mathematics, and is a trustee for the Simons-Laufer Mathematical Sciences Institute. Welcome, Maria, and thanks for agreeing to represent the philanthropy sector today. Speaking to us with her industry hat on, we have Tsu-Jae King Liu, Dean of the College of Engineering at UC Berkeley. Go Bears. She serves on the board of directors for Intel Corporation and Max Linear, which was was previously senior director of engineering in the Advanced Technology Group of Synopsys. Tsu-Jae also holds 96 patents. Welcome, Tsu-Jae, to today's panel, and thank you again for representing the perspective from industry. And our third panelist is Nick Moore, representing state government as the director of the Alabama Governor's Office of Education and Workforce Transformation. Nick Moore is focused on aligning Alabama's education and workforce programs, implementing Alabama's state longitudinal database system, establishing Alabama's non-degree credential quality and transparency system, and curating a competency-based education and skills-based hiring system in Alabama. Welcome to you as well, Nick. We really value your experience and expertise from the state government perspective. And so now we're going to enter a fireside chat segment of our panel. We don't have a fireplace here, but y'all can imagine a nice crackling fire as we start this conversation. And I'm going to invite each of you as we get started with these questions to answer wearing your sector-specific hat. We really want to pull these three different sector perspectives together. And so to get us started, I'd like to begin with a two-part question. And that is, what do your sectors, state government, industry, and philanthropy, see as the most urgent STEM workforce needs that a multi-sectoral NDEA 2.0 should address? That's part one. And part two is, what existing programs could be scaled to address those needs? Who would like to begin?
Well, I can jump in.
Thanks, Nick. Please.
From the state perspective, something that's indelibly important to us is to make sure that we have the STEM talent pipeline that's capable of filling the in-demand jobs that we're recruiting. So we know that 95% of the new jobs that we're recruiting in the state require a post-secondary credential of some form. It's not always a graduate degree or even a bachelor's degree, although we do know that those degrees provide the best labor market return over a lifetime. But what we're focused on doing is opening up and democratizing new modalities of learning that allow people to take their lived experiences, whether somebody might be a veteran or they could be self-employed, and to take what heretofore have been hard to validate learning assertions, and then to be able to tag those to discrete competencies that can then be bundled up towards degree credit. And so in the world of a lot of folks beginning to question the value proposition of post-secondary learning, now is a good time for us to be able to vouchsafe that by showing that there is a means of connecting more people who currently are not participating in the labor market, or those that may be falling through the cracks through leaks in our secondary to post-secondary talent system, that we are finding ways to make sure that people do have pathways, not only into post-secondary education and STEM degrees, but those are career connected, that we're investing more in dual and concurrent credit and work-based learning and career connected learning, so that from a two-generation perspective, we are showing people opportunities within their communities, within the state. Many times folks don't know the opportunities available to them in STEM pathways, because it's very hard to know what you want to be if you haven't seen what there is to be. And so we've seen that to be true for young people in middle school and high school, as much as sometimes adults who come through our public workforce system. So we want to make sure that we're providing the type of supportive services, whether that's transportation or childcare or student financial aid assistance, to make sure people can not only persist in their post-secondary pathway, but also persist in the workforce and ultimately reach self-sufficiency.
Yeah. That's great, Nick. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing, especially the ways in which your state is thinking about innovating STEM education pathways by respecting the choices that students are making, the ways in which they would like to get to meaningful careers quickly. Who would like to go next?
I'll go next.
Thanks, Maria.
I'm going to talk a bit about what happens in pre-K to 12. And I think one of the things that is very clear to me throughout my career is that there are certain kinds of individuals who are less likely to pursue STEM majors in college and to pursue a STEM career. And what this particular legislation really focuses on is how can we increase that number? And the people I'll just mention are women, particularly in areas of computer science and engineering. And Tsu-Jae and I are two counterexamples to that, but there's not that. I mean, it's still only about 20% of undergraduates majoring in computer science are female. People of color are much less likely to go on, and especially into PhD programs, and people from low-income families. And one of the things that the Simons Foundation, which is the foundation started by Jim Simons, which happens to fund Math for America and is one of the largest private foundations supporting STEM research in the country. Jim Simons launched something called Math for America with the idea of getting great math and science teachers into K through 12 schools in New York City. It was copied in a number of different areas. I was one of the people with others who started the Math for America in Los Angeles chapter. There's one in DC. There have been ones in San Diego and Boston. But the general idea is, if we want children to be inspired to think about STEM careers, it really helps to have truly outstanding math and science teachers, and especially in high school and in middle school, but also in elementary school. And so at the moment, Math for America in New York City supports about 1,000 teachers. And what I will say is that's a really good start, but it's not enough. One of the reasons it's not enough is that for kids, particularly from low-income families, they need more than just a great teacher, because they have to believe it's going to apply to them. And so they need more opportunities, for example, to do high school internships with a tech company or a finance company, so they can actually see what you learn from that experience. And this is something we are trying to implement with partnerships with tech companies and finance companies in New York City. It is mentioned, co-op programs are mentioned in the NDEA legislation for NDEA 2.0. And I'll just say, as someone who is both an American citizen but also a Canadian citizen, one of the things I think the U.S. really needs is more co-op programs, because it is often for women, people of color, people from low-income backgrounds, it's often the experience to actually see how you can use what you've learned theoretically to solve real-world problems that convinces them that they could go on in that career. So I'm going to pass it over to Tsu-Jae right now, but I think all of us need to come together and help make this happen.
Yeah. Thank you so much, especially with your comments there toward the end, Maria, about the importance of basically hands-on internships or co-ops to make the relevance to students apparent. Tsu-Jae, we welcome you to pick up that part of the strand or another part.
Oh, happy to pick up on that. Thanks, Kayvon, and thank you, Maria. Just want to maybe supplement what Nick and Maria have already shared. But I also first wanted to just acknowledge the NSB's vision for a multi-sectoral approach to the NDEA 2.0. I think we all know that the NDA of 1958 was probably one of the most successful past examples of boosting STEM education in response to national security challenges. I'd just like to point out that the National Academies recently put out a report on international talent programs in the changing global environment. It was a consensus study committee that put out that report, and I was a member of that committee. And part of our recommendations did indicate that we should pass Congress should pass legislation modeled on the NDEA of 1958. So really want to applaud the NSB for your vision.
Thank you.
So I think Maria's point, there are a lot of things I resonated with there. There actually are a lot of existing examples of successful programs. And the question is, well, the size of the need, Kayvon, that you mentioned is so large. We really need a whole of government, but a whole country approach. We need to tap into existing talent. So, women today represent about 20%, 28% of the STEM workforce. And so there's some untapped talent there. We know that people from underserved regions of the country, they should be given more opportunities to contribute. So how do we share and propagate best practices? Like there are working examples, let's say companies working with community colleges in Maricopa County, for example, and then there's multiple examples, community colleges, universities working with companies regarding apprenticeships and co-op programs. It's interesting. Companies actually don't benefit so much from apprenticeship programs, at least in the first few years, because the students are primarily learning rather than contributing. So it'd be great if the federal government or local governments could subsidize those programs, at least for the first couple of years, because after that, then the apprentices, they actually end up taking permanent positions and they do contribute to the companies. So there is net return on investment in industry, but I think industry sometimes would need some kind of incentive. This is where government can come in. Now, in terms of sharing best practices or keeping track of best practices and sharing them, I think your multi-sectoral approach should also include not only industry and government and academia, but also nonprofit organizations. Those nonprofits, they might be better suited to organizing networks to actually share, because if you think about it, a single company running some effort to share best practices probably will be biased. Same thing with a single university. So I think we should really think about including nonprofit organizations to help promote sharing and propagation of best practices. And then finally, in terms of, because your question, Kayvon, was what are the most urgent STEM workforce needs? Right. Well, companies today already cannot fill the jobs that they have available. So the most urgent need is really to have fast ramp, like reskilling or upskilling of skilled workers. So including veterans of the military, the armed forces, or if we can encourage people who might have taken time out from their careers to care for family members, so on, like certificate programs, badging programs. I think these in the short term can help to address the STEM workforce needs. But in the longer term, working with degree or with educators, because that's a longer pathway, but certainly in the long term, it will fill the pipeline. So I think there's a multifaceted solution to address the urgent and long-term STEM workforce needs. And they do indeed span all levels of educational background. So from skilled trades to technicians to engineers to future researchers who will ensure that our nation has the pipeline, a full pipeline of innovation to maintain technological leadership.
Great. Thank you, Tsu-Jae. That's great. And maybe for this next question, we can go in the reverse order. And Tsu-Jae, since you have the mic already, maybe you can keep going on this next question, because so the question is, to solve the domestic STEM talent crisis, and this echoes what you were just saying, Tsu-Jae, is going to require an all-hands-on-deck approach in which multi-sectoral investment is paramount. So I really want to emphasize for this question that word investment. What could be included in NDA 2.0 that would excite, think investment, your respective sectors? What kinds of proposals or provisions in the legislation would bring them to the table? Again, think investment. And so, Tsu-Jae, and as just one more bit of context for that, as you think about your response, Tsu-Jae, one of the things that we've been emphasizing is just how much private industry has taken a leadership role in investing in R&D in the United States. So how do we leverage that interest that's already happening in terms of investment from the private industry sector? What would they need to see in this legislation?
It's a good question. Well, first of all, the draft legislation, you already have very good components, right? Investing in local STEM education and workforce ecosystems. I think ecosystem is key, right? So industry is certainly part of the ecosystem. Maybe trying to get the industry to also invest directly in students, funding scholarships would be good. I think any kind of a matching program would be good, so that industry, at least I know in California, state of California in the past, when our state offered some matching funds, like for industry, they would know that they automatically have a return on their investment because the state is co-investing in research or students. So I think those kinds of programs are needed. I think for industry, I think what's missing is that something to benefit the industry. So I know I'm in the semiconductor industry. If there's some way, and the federal government already has started to do this, right, with the CHIPS and Science Act, but for other industrial sectors, how can the government sort of invest in more broadly for engineering, for example, in general? Because if we can elevate the stature and the attractiveness of engineering as a field, all companies will benefit, and they can co-invest with the federal government. So I think maybe thinking more at the nationwide level, how do we make investments so that companies they will want to co-invest because they know that ultimately they will benefit because there's more talent or more R&D support, so on and so forth. So I think, but this comes back, I think somebody mentioned, maybe it was in the earlier session, about culture, this culture of competition and elitism. I mean, this is what we have in industry and in academia. Like, we always try to look out for ourselves, our own organizations. We need to be incentivized. Our leaders need to be incentivized to think about not only our own organizations, but for the nation's benefit. So I think that's where legislation like NDEA can really help to effect sea change.
Thank you so much, and for reminding us that so often, at least for private industry, the return on investment is something that we have to be mindful of and can't simply ignore. Thank you.
I'm going to build on what Tsu-Jae said about competition. So one of the things that I'm particularly proud of at Harvey-Mudd College is the culture that it is every student's responsibility to help every other student succeed. And the faculty are the same way about how they work together. And I think that, generally speaking, the US needs to move away from competition and within ourselves together towards collaboration to reach the kinds of goals we've been talking about. In terms of, what can make a difference, there's no question in my mind that doing things to enhance teacher salaries in STEM fields does make a difference. And, I'll just point out that it's very hard to find well-trained computer science teachers in high school and middle school. And why is that? It's because there's a shortage of computer science graduates in general for industry. There's a shortage of computer science PhDs for both industry and academia. And unless we do some things to adjust this, it's going to be very hard to meet the needs of the country, because I agree that engineering is really important. I agree that all kinds of areas in STEM are really important. But the areas where the most cutting edge stuff is happening right now is AI, data science, cybersecurity, fields like that. And, Tsu-Jae was talking about a National Academies task force that she was part of. I'm co-chairing a National Academies task force on production of computer science PhDs. And again, we're just not producing enough. So providing more graduate fellowships, which is one of the things that is in the proposed legislation, I think is incredibly important. But even more so, thinking of ways that we can partner philanthropy, industry, and the government in funding graduate fellowships that actually are competitive with the opportunities in industry. So if I finish my undergraduate degree in computer science right now and go take a job someplace, I can easily earn $200,000 a year as a fresh-baked bachelor's degree student. And if I go take a job as a graduate student someplace, I might be earning $30K on top of my tuition. And, we just have to do something to make it more reasonable, particularly for people who come from low-income families and are expected to be supporting their family while they're going to university and while they're working afterwards.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for those perspectives. Nick, you're going to get the last word here in the fireside chat. So the same question for you. I would like to invite you, Nick, as you think about these questions from the state government perspective, help us understand how you think about it specifically from the state of Alabama perspective, not because the state of Alabama is representative of all the other 49 states, but specifically because Alabama is representative of Alabama. And I think it would be helpful for us to understand how, from one state's perspective, how do you think about this question as you try to advance quality of life and outcomes for Alabama and Alabamans?
Well, it's very important that we develop a reciprocal feedback loop and can generate signaling mechanisms between the supply and the demand side of the talent marketplace. And so that means not just convening industry in one-off meetings, which is easy for us in government and education sometimes to do, but to create the iterative sectoral strategies that allow us to take what business and industry deem to be in demand for their work process schedules, and then to truly build and design programs around those needs. And that's not to say just to put industry on a pedestal, but to create a working relationship to where we move away from the build it and they will come model of developing programs and invite industry to be a partner. And I certainly agree that having a full mixture of the firms within the industry sector is important to make sure that we're not allowing biases to seep into what we've designed. But how we've approached that in Alabama is to codify something we call the Alabama Committee on Credential and Career Pathways. And there's 16 sectoral partnerships, and we use the National Career Cluster Framework. And we use our primary LMI to come up with labor market information to come up with a regional and statewide list of in-demand jobs, using not just raw demand and not just scraping the internet for what's in demand, but using qualitative factors as well to make sure that people have a progressive wage increase, that there's a series of stackable credentials of value that are aligned to it. And then we also then come up with qualification frameworks that are the DNA or the competency model for those in-demand jobs. And within the industry sectors, we've gotten, for example, manufacturing and healthcare, information technology, to agree on what we consider to be the ready to work skills to prepare somebody for an entry-level job. And then partnering with our community college system and several regional institutions, we've built out asynchronous courses that individuals can take that also count as, for the federal public workforce system, Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, recognized post-secondary credentials. So we can develop integrated education and training programs, for example, for adults, so they can earn a GED, they can earn a high school equivalency, get industry recognized skills, and then have the first of a set of series of stackable skills that can lead them all the way to a PhD. Also would say that it's important that we have a non-degree credential quality and transparency process so that credentials and learning assertions of all kinds just become the wrapper for a bundle of competencies. It's those discrete skills that underlie learning assertions that are important. So we've also embarked on the work of taking all of our SIP codes, for example, and not just doing what, in academia, sometimes we do these SIP to SOC crosswalks to figure out how the learning assertions in a particular course would then translate into industry skills. But we want to go a step beyond that and come up with more statewide articulation indexes, so we don't have to just have faculty-based assertions of credit for prior learning, that if somebody that's a veteran or somebody that has been self-employed or maybe somebody that's re-entering from being justice involved and they present a number of skills, we want to be able to translate those into those competency statements that can then allow them to get credit for prior learning. And then lastly, to operationalize this so that we're not doing duplicative and manual data entry, we have built what we believe the nation's first full-scale talent marketplace called the Alabama Talent Triad. You can find it at alabamatriad.com. And what it is a credential registry, a skills-based job description, and a learning and employment record that allows somebody to translate, transcribe, and transact all of the competencies they've earned and then be matched up with in-demand jobs that are based off of those qualification frameworks that an employer can customize and then post. So it allows somebody to then match talent with opportunity. And then it's all then predicated on our quality assurance process for non-degree credentials values as well. And so we've got about 20,000 students and 400 employers in it, and it's been live since last December. And we're working also across state lines to make sure that doesn't just become a unicorn, because commuting patterns don't stop at state lines. But we feel that is the next evolution of allowing competency-based education and skills-based hiring to thrive. You have to do those concurrently. And the way to do that is to use AI, large and medium language models, to be able to reduce all learning assertions to competencies and then match those up with individual students and job seekers that happen to have those skills.
Nick, fantastic. One of the phrases that we use often in thinking about NDA 2.0 on the National Science Board is place-based innovation. And I think board members will recognize in the example you just heard why it makes so much sense for us to be thinking about place-based innovation, leveraging this expertise that each and every one of the 50 states will have for knowing how to do these things in creative ways. What you just heard from one state, we can do 50 times over if we leverage this place-based innovation expertise. Thank you so much to all of you. I'm going to turn it over to my board colleague, Julia Phillips, now for board Q&A with the panelists.
Thank you so much, Kayvon, and thank you, Nick, Maria, and Tsu-Jae, for these very provocative comments, many of which are very parallel to some of the conversations that we've had in the context of the board. The floor is now open for questions and comments from the board, from board members, and we already have two lined up. So, Suresh Babu.
Thank you very much, Julia. So one of the comment Nick made is about the wraparound services. You're providing daycare and transportation for those people who are interested in expanding their STEM skills. Can you give a little bit more details about that, please? Thank you.
Yes, sir. So what we realized quickly with iterative surveys that we did before and after COVID is that people are not turning their back on work or post-secondary education. They're in fact facing marginal tax rate increases as they transition into paid employment and away from means-tested transfer payments. And so an economist would call that a marginal tax rate increase, and in the lingo of the policy world, people call those benefits cliffs. And so people that are facing benefits cliffs often find it difficult to persist in post-secondary education in the workforce. So what we've done is twofold. Number one, we worked with the Atlanta Fed to design a benefit cliff and self-sufficiency tool that we've integrated into our education and workforce system that allows somebody to provide basic information about their family dynamics and then helps them to figure out how to pick the best package of not only education and training and employment, but also supportive services to allow them to overcome those benefits cliffs. So the state can stand in the breach to make sure that people in that sometimes 18 months to 2-year window, as they're transitioning into self-sufficiency, are made whole, or at least as close to being made whole as possible. And so what we found is transportation, housing, and childcare are the largest barriers people face. Many times it's first and last dollar issues that can't be funded with federal dollars. And so we're using not only philanthropic and private dollars to help extend and expand what we can do with federal Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act funds to pay for things like a pair of steel-toe boots, a gas card, if somebody needs a housing voucher for a month. And we've also done some things to help support small and medium-sized childcare providers to help Sherpa them through the licensure process. Childcare is somewhat of a federal issue as well. It's a market failure with a tension between access and quality, and we want to see quality continue to increase, but that also increases cost. So until we arrive at the place to where we have the tax treatment for childcare to be akin to healthcare, to where it's a non-taxable benefit, we will continue to see those issues. But as a state, we're doing what we can to try to assist families to overcome that very real market failure that often inhibits women from being able to participate in the labor force, because they often are hit with the largest element of childcare. And then we see many also facing a situation where they're caring for elders and then also children. And facing rural circumstances as well, public transportation can't always be the answer because we have very low density areas. And so helping individuals with financial literacy and being able to do things like work with automobile dealers and local workforce boards to help support individuals with being able to maintain a personally owned vehicle.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we go to the next question, there are a number of board members who are attending this meeting virtually. And for this Q&A session, we'd appreciate it if you could turn on your cameras if you're able to do so. Now we're moving on to Sarah O'Donnell.
I appreciate the panel's discussion on this topic, and I also am particularly interested in the cross-sectorial, cross-jurisdiction aspect of this conversation. One topic I'd like to hear more about is how we're tapping into the military service academies, how we're looking into the Navy and service recruiters that are focused on STEM in order to leverage capitalize on what the DoD is looking into from a STEM field. Thank you.
Okay. Who would like to take a stab at that one? Tsu-Jae?
I can start. I'm sure my fellow panelists will supplement my answer. So thanks for that question, Sarah. So your question is about what is already being done, I assume. So just as one example in the semiconductor industry, I know there are organizations that have been working to develop programs specifically for veterans of the military, for the armed forces, because we recognize that they have a lot of the knowledge, skills, and abilities, or the skills and abilities, maybe not yet the knowledge needed to contribute to this particular industry. So I think there already is a recognition by industry, which was really suffering with a lack of talent, that they need to look at ways to reskill or upskill existing workers. I think the question is the size of the need and the urgency of the workforce need is so great that we really need to think at a national level, how do we, replicate this or magnify the impact across all industry sectors and across various levels of education? I think that's what's needed. There are existing examples that are working well, in my view.
I'll just add on top of that, and this is probably something that everybody knows already, but there are programs that basically pay for undergraduate education in a STEM degree in exchange for a certain number of years of service in the military afterwards. ROTC is just one of the examples. And I think that is certainly something that has encouraged a number of students from low-income backgrounds to be able to attend some of the top universities and colleges in the country.
Just to build on that a bit, I mean, we want to make Alabama the most military-friendly state in the nation, not only for those that are on active duty and those that are in the Guard and Reserve, but also for retirees. And so we not only make the case that we have low cost of living, great quality of life, but we do things like licensure reciprocity, making sure that military families have access to school choice opportunities to find the educational environment that best meets the needs of their children, and also making sure that we have robust scholarship programs for not only military dependents, but also for active duty and retirees themselves. And also taking joint service transcripts and taking military occupations and doing the work of translating those into the civilian SOC codes. So that way we can very easily, for any service member in the state, give them a learning and employment record that allows them to most ably compete in the labor market without losing any time.
Great. Thank you very much. Victor McCrary.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you to all the panel. We appreciate your time and efforts here. This question is for you, Nick. I was down in Gulf Shores, Alabama this summer. I had a good conversation with my good friend Lynn Chronister and her colleagues in the university system there about how they developed the workforce infrastructure to support Airbus and that whole area around Mobile. Can you talk from your perspective, what was the incentives that got them not only talking among each other, but for universities working with the trade schools and the community colleges and the business sector, which otherwise are not necessarily folks who engage on a frequent basis, but what were the incentives that changed that conversation? Because also the students, in one sense, people could say it was a zero-sum game, but they saw it as a plus-sum game.
Well, that's a great question. I think that's why it takes strong gubernatorial leadership, working closely with the legislature and the business community. In a state of nature, fog of war, I think the tendency is towards silos in the talent system from pre-K through the workforce. And so what the governor has done working with the legislature is establish what success looks like at every layer of our post-secondary system. And we've also facilitated partnerships at the local level so that we've got hub and spoke organizations. So you mentioned the work that we're doing with USA and Bishop State and Coastal Community College in that area. And that's because, Chancellor Baker and the leadership of our community college system have empowered presidents at each of our community colleges for those institutions to be economic development engines, working closely with our Department of Commerce to show that we have a on-demand talent pipeline. Part of our secret sauce also is the Alabama Industrial Development Technology. That's our workforce training economic incentive program. It does pre-employment training. So we not only do the pre-employment training for those that are receiving economic incentives, but our community college system then provides the longer term upskilling, and that helps employers to retain their talent for longer term. And so it's a combination of not only cash economic incentives, but also those workforce investment training incentives and a strong level of leadership from the state and also local level that demonstrates what success looks like, so you don't leave it to each individual actor within that local dynamic to try to figure out for themselves what the state may be looking for.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I'd like to change gears just a little bit, or change the direction just a little bit. I was struck by a thread that started towards the end of y'all's conversation about culture and the nature of kind of American culture, if you like, which is, of course, very individualist. It's very competitive, very elitist, and that does not necessarily bode well for partnering. To begin this piece, I'm wondering, Maria, if you could talk a little bit more about that Harvey Mudd culture. That sounded fascinating, and kind of how it, if you know how that got started and how it has sustained itself, and maybe a little bit more about what has changed as a result.
Yes, thank you. Well, I was at Harvey Mudd for 17 years. That's a long time to be a college president. And I'm absolutely sure that there were elements of the collaboration there before I came. And I think to a certain extent, it has been there since the college was founded in 1955. But it was also a very white and very male college when I arrived in terms of the student body. It was 70% white and 70% male. And by the time I left, it was 50% female, including in every major. And for those of you who don't know Harvey Mudd, it's a STEM college. It has the most rigorous curriculum I've ever encountered. The only place that comes close is Caltech. And it is, by the time I left, it was one of the most diverse colleges in terms of race in the country. And the whole bit that made that change in diversity, equity, inclusion happen was the focus on collaboration. And, there are lots of things that our faculty did to really make it impossible to succeed at Mudd without collaborating with other students. One of the things we had to face was the fact that we had some students who had gone to, top private high schools across the country. And we had some students who were coming from local high schools in Southern California. And I'll just say, and they were top students from those schools, but the level of preparation they had didn't come close. But because the curriculum was made so challenging, nobody, including the students who were coming from Bronx School of Science or Stuyvesant or, your favorite private prep school, nobody was going to survive without helping others and without asking for help. And I think one of the things we really learned was that you learn much more by helping someone else understand something than by just understanding it yourself. And, by the time we had been really focusing on this for about a decade, I would hear from employers, they would say things like, you hire somebody from MIT, you get a really well-educated students. They're very smart. You hire somebody from Harvey Mudd, and they're well-educated and smart, but they make their whole team better because they know how to work together. They know how to collaborate. And so I think the single thing I learned from being at Mudd for 17 years was collaboration makes everything better. And as you go through life, thinking about ways that you help others to succeed lets you have way more impact than thinking about just how you're going to help yourself succeed.
So if I could extend that just a little bit and pull in the other two panelists as well, how might we take, that experience and those lessons and apply it to NDEA first to make it a reality, but then second to make that reality really work?
Well, I can take a stab. I think, how do we take that culture to the corporate level, industry and universities and colleges and so on? I think that is necessary in order for our nation to thrive in the long term. So I think the key is, incentivizing collaboration. And once companies I'm representing the industrial sector. Once companies actually see the real benefit of actually collaborating, like in terms of workforce development and maybe pre-competitive R&D, then they will be able to justify to their shareholders that yes, this is worth investing their own a portion of their revenues, right, to continue to support the growth of collaboration. In addition to collaboration, another word I'd like to use here at Berkeley is empowerment, right? We want to empower others to succeed. We want to empower our fellow students, our colleagues, our states, our nation to succeed. So what can we do to contribute to that? I think that's a good perspective to really try to encourage through the NDEA.
Thank you for those thoughts.
And I think,
Yeah, Daria. Oh, just a sec. Yes, go ahead, Nick.
and I think employers live in the embodied world, and it's important that we keep conversations like this, not just in the notional sense, but connected to, the fact that employers are competitive because they, are competing against their competitors. So where a state can come in, for example, with our sectoral partnerships, is create an environment and a space for them to be able to collaborate in a situation and around the areas to where it makes the most sense for them to do so in an anti-competitive way. And so, it's very easy to have these conversations theoretically, but you've got to be able to operationalize that in a way that makes sense, and then continue to connect that back to the fact that if we want employers to really participate in these things, it needs to save them time and money, because they're not going to do it just because it sounds good to do.
Right. Thank you. Dario.
Thank you for the great conversation. I wanted to go back to the topic of scale. So what initiative that you're involved in personally, like, the top initiative you think, if the conditions were right, could scale either at state level or even nationally? Which one would you pick, and what would it take to do that?
I'll jump in quickly, because I think the notion of having a full-scale talent marketplace that uses AI and machine learning to connect talent to opportunity using competency statements. I think over the next 18 months, you'll see several regional solutions rise to the fore that have been funded through philanthropic resources, and I think we'll reach national consensus on a competency schema. For example, the work that Credential Engine is doing with the credential transparency descriptor language. And then you'll see that being able to be commercialized in the private sector, and will eventually come to some national and then international talent marketplaces that can allow us to reimagine the time and credit-based way that we design academic programs and accredit them. And I think that's going to play out over a decade, but we'll live in the world of a competency and skills-based system, and then the traditional world over that period of time. And those that are in the vanguard of it will have the greatest ROI, and we'll have a number of fence setters, and those that are waiting to see what happens that will maybe have more of a limited ROI off of that transition.
I'm going to go for STEM teacher programs, because New York State has a STEM teacher program based on Math for America, and it has been really operated through the SUNY system, funded by the government. It has been very successful. We have the New York City STEM teachers program. There was there is a beginning STEM teachers program funded through the National Science Foundation through the CHIPS and Science Act, but it's not enough to have real impact unless there's more funding there. So I would love to see that become a national program.
Yeah, I agree with Nick and Maria, not surprisingly. I think also maybe something to think about in our sector, in my semiconductor industry sector, we've seen places stand up programs, but then they actually don't fill the seats, right? So I think fundamentally, if we're doing all these things to train STEM teachers and have programs and databases that connect students with job opportunities, I think if we don't even attract, the talent in the first place, so what can we do as a nation to increase awareness of STEM careers, like the tremendous impact and how rewarding it is? Like that's missing, because if parents and students don't realize that, hey, these are careers that are, impactful and potentially for their own their own children, like we're not going to be able to fill the seats in these programs, and therefore not fill the jobs that are waiting for them. Right. So I think something needs to be included in NDEA to increase public awareness and appreciation for STEM careers and, their impact. That's just to complement everything that you've already put into the draft legislation.
Thank you for that. And putting in my 2 cents worth, if you want to expand the geography of innovation, people have to have role models and understand what you might do with these careers. And there are large area swaths of the country where there is minimal exposure to that. So very important. Roger Beachy, I think this will be the last question.
Yes, thanks very much for the opportunity here. And thank you for the panel. Thanks to the panel for the great discussion. Nick, and all of you, I'm interested in all the innovations that I've heard about today. And we on the board welcome all the inputs we can get. One of the things that we focus on, however, is how you measure success, and over what period of time should we be measuring success so we can make sure the program continues or grows. And in your program, Nick, for example, as an example, how do you track, or are you tracking, and over what period of time? And can you have staying power between administrations so that we over time, over the next decade or two, see the outcome of an NDEA 0.2 with ideas like yours at Alabama? And I have the same questions for Tsu-Jae and Maria. How do we track so that we can continue to urge congressional support for what we want to do for this program, a program like this? Thanks.
Continuity is certainly, political continuity is important. I mean, I have the fortune of working for a governor who has been in office for now going on 8 years, and we'll have a 10-year run. And it's also nice she's not running for president, so we have time to do deeper level work. And but I think part of that is making the work so indelible and so supported by the business community, education, training providers, that whomever succeeds you has a hard time going too far away from what has been established. I think it's also important to think about sustainable funding, not only from the federal level, but state level. But as far as tracking outcomes, we're trying to go away from input-based evaluation and more outcomes-based. I mean, it's easy for agency heads or people in government to say, well, this is how much money I need this year. This is what I did with it. This is how much more I need. See you again next year. Much more difficult to say, these are the goals we've set. This is how we've had to be vulnerable, work with others to try to demonstrate an ROI. And what we've done is set labor force participation and attainment goals for 16 special populations that are those hardest to serve. And so each region, each census tract has a goal for how many people need to be recruited, trained, hired, and retained across each county, across each special population, and then statewide. And you either hit your target or you didn't. And then we try to causally correlate to the greatest extent possible what is the intervention that helped to arrive at that outcome. And so it's certainly not perfect yet, but it's a lot better than what we inherit as a full input-based system of measurement.
I'll just say that we also are trying to focus on outcomes, and we are undertaking evaluations in New York City on the outcomes for students in terms of the teachers, and we're also doing an evaluation study on the professional development that we offer teachers to try and see what impact that actually had on their students. So I think it's a great question. I want to say evaluation is often difficult, but it's really important to do.
Specific metrics I'd like to add. So I know that NSB, the pre-reading for this session, showed the math scores, 8th grade math scores declining overall, racial, ethnic groups. That's pretty alarming. So if we can see that trend reverse, that people, but this comes to the original point I made, like why should students care about doing well in math and science? Like, they don't see a point. So we need to sort of inspire them, right? That's what's missing. So indicator could be improving math scores again. In this country, the graduation rate for engineering programs in universities and colleges is less than 45%. At Berkeley, it's over 95%, but that's like, there's a leaky pipeline. So if we can see improved graduation rates from these STEM degree programs, that would be an indicator. And that might require like some of these wraparound services to help students and so on. Another longer term indicator would be the number of patents filed and publications, because that just is an indicator of innovation. We definitely need to stay ahead in technology. And that means in innovation. And that's going to be important for long-term success, economic and national security for this country. So there are basic indicators like this that are already there's already data that we can track pretty easily.
Great.
Yeah, the economic impacts are equally as important, and I think Alabama's taking a good look at that. And I think they're helpful components that, in the long term, I think is what's important. And Dario and we in the board recognize that this is a long slog, and it's not going to happen overnight. And I think having the staying power to continue to focus is going to be critical. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Roger, and thank you very much to the panelists for your thoughts and sharing your perspectives from the different parts of the partnerships that we are going to realize we all need to build in order to be successful in the NDEA 2.0 and its goals. I know there are likely individuals who are leaders in industry, philanthropy, state and local governments who are listening in today, and just wanted to let you all know, as well as any others that may be in the room, that we are continuing to seek good ideas on how we might build out NDEA 2.0, and we are also very much in the hunt for champions to join the coalition. So we look forward to having you reach out to us. And in that space, there are a number of my fellow board members, well, all of you. The effort requires all of us to pull on our collective networks to build a robust multi-sectoral support for this effort. NDEA is nothing if not big and bold and in response to the domestic STEM talent crisis. There is a working group of board colleagues composed of Heather Wilson, Kayvon Stassen, Joan Farini-Mundy, Dario, and myself. And we have begun coalition building and are enjoying many very informative, enlightening conversations in the days that are going on now. For the board members, please refer to tab 4.1 in the diligent book for our work plan. We welcome additional connections and encourage you to communicate with board office staff. Particularly, Elise Lipkowitz is the staff lead on the project. And, of course, together we can do mighty things. And the inspiration from the partnering and interdependence that we've heard about today is really, I think, a great thing for us to strive towards as we look forward to introducing an NDEA 2.0 early next year. Now I'm turning the floor back to Dario.